Mannlicher.
Welcome to the Mannlicher Mike channel. One rifle in my collection I hadn't shot for some reason or another to complete the major powers of World War I was my Steyr Mannlicher M.1895. I finally accomplished that so I can do a top-to-bottom World War I list sometime in the future. But this and the next video will concentrate on the Mannlicher M95 rifle and the M95 .34 carbine, respectively. Before getting to the development of the rifle, I guess I should start with a little history of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Habsburgs had ruled the empire in various forms for centuries. This empire would encompass many different ethnic groups and religions, many times at odds with each other. Franz Joseph had become emperor in 1848, the same year as republicanism spread throughout Europe, leaving a distaste for anything democratic or republican in the mouth of the new emperor. Losing a war to the French-backed Kingdom of Piedmont forced concessions of creating a parliament in Vienna and local diets in the provinces in 1861. This did little to quell feelings of nationalism among the provinces. While Austria had notions of uniting the German states, Otto von Bismarck of Prussia had other plans. The empire would support Prussia in a war against Denmark in 1864, hoping for control of the Danish province of Holstein in return. Bismarck had no intention of ceding this to Austria, so the empire would go to war against Prussia and other German states in 1866, only to have their asses handed to them in 7 weeks in the Austro-Prussian War. The Austro-Hungarian army was a monster on paper, but their multi-ethnic hodgepodge was no match for the Allied German forces led by Helmut von Moltke. In the peace agreement, Bismarck showed restraint by making Austria only cede Venice to the Kingdom of Italy, who Prussia was grooming as a future ally. The empire had to recognize Prussia's dominance over the northern German states and not get in the way if they wanted to join the quickly unifying German state. Bismarck had no desire to deal with the different ethnic groups the empire ruled over, as well as he wanted the empire as an ally for future conflicts. 2 stinging losses within a decade led to the different ethnic groups increasing calls for autonomy and independence, especially for the Hungarians. Franz Joseph agreed to the 1867 Compromise, which split the empire into Austrian, Germanic, and Hungarian halves, with each ruling over the ethnic minorities within their boundaries. This would lead to desires for more autonomy from the Czechs, Poles, and Slavic populations within the empire. As I mentioned in my FEG 37M video, both Austria and Hungary would have their own home armies, the KK Landwehr for Austria and the Honved for Hungary, and there was the Common Army, the K&K Army. These armies were a huge force on paper. 302,000 in the Common Army, 27,000 in the Landwehr, and 28,000 in the Honved, with an expansion of up to nearly 5 million by 1917. But different ethnic populations and languages did not make for a united military. The language of the Landwehr was German, the Honved Hungarian, and German was the official language of the Common Army, although in most cases Hungarian regiments would stick to Hungarian. To complicate things even further, the Landwehr and the Common Army would allow instruction in soldiers' native languages, although it was difficult for non-Austrians to become more than a non-commissioned officer. The Honved and Hungarian regiments of the Common Army enforced Hungarian as the official language, which created even more contention among their minorities. In the Common Army, 80% of the officers were ethnic Germans, while it was only 30% among the enlisted. Most of the Slavic populations were more loyal to their ethnic groups in the empire, which drastically affected their ability as a fighting force in the Great War. Austro-Hungarian soldiers of Slavic descent would surrender to the Russians and eventually form the Czechoslovak region, which fought with the Russians against the empire. On a side note, once Russia exited the war and the Bolsheviks took over, they took control of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, fought their way to Vladivostok, and made their way back to the newly formed Czechoslovakia all the way around the world. It was this ethnic hodgepodge, along with the poor training, medical, and logistics that made the empire usually have to ask Germany for help, creating a drain for their much stronger ally. Keeping this history and the general poor reputation of the Austro-Hungarian army as a fighting force in mind, when I later talk about the reputation of the rifle. It is here where we need to go from a quick and dirty history of the empire to a quick and dirty history leading up to today's rifle. In the Central European arms industry in general, the Czechs supplied the inventiveness while the Austrians would supply industrial know-how and finance. In 1821, Leopold Verndl would establish himself in Steyr, where he'd make various components for the new Lorenz percussion rifled musket. Leopold had two sons, Joseph and Franz. While Joseph served his military service as an armorer, he met a Czech by the name of Karl Holub, who was a locksmith serving as a gunsmith in the army. They became fast friends. Joseph would try to convince his father to modernize and expand the factory, but Leopold was stuck in the old, gilded ways. Joseph and Holub would travel to the United States and spend time with Colt, Remington, and Pratt & Whitney to learn mass production. They would return to Austria, where Joseph and Franz planned to start their own factory, when their father died in 1855. The two brothers took over the factory, with Joseph looking to modernize, while Franz took care of the financial aspects. After the disastrous 7 Weeks' War in 1866, where the Prussians had breech-loading Dreiser rifles, the Empire looked to convert Lorenz rifles to breech-loading using the Wonsel system, which basically turned it into a trapdoor rifle that fired a rimfire 14mm cartridge. The Verndls would receive an order for 80,000 of these conversions. Joseph's friend and now employee, Holub, developed his own system to convert the muskets using a rotating drum breech that would fire the new 11mm centerfire cartridge. This would be adopted as the Infantry Gewehr Model 1867, and Verndl would receive orders for nearly 250,000 rifles. Holub retained patent rights while Verndl retained the manufacturing rights, hence the rifle being known as the Verndl. The Verndls would again expand the company, creating a joint stock company called the Österreichische Waffenfabriksgesellschaft, or in English, the Austrian Arms Manufacturing Company, or more commonly known as Steyr. Steyr would receive contracts to produce other rifles, including the Grau and even the Mauser Model 71, as well as the Kropatschek to be sold to other countries. As worries for the company's future happened due to contracts winding down, in walked Ferdinand Mannlicher in 1877. Mannlicher was born in 1848 in the German state of Hesse-Kassel. His father died when Ferdinand was 17, and he moved with his brother in Vienna to pursue his studies. He would become chief engineer at the Austrian Imperial Northern Railroad, railroad engineer, not design engineer. He became fascinated with small arms design when visiting the United States in 1876, deciding upon a career change. It was around this time he became associated with Verndl and Steyr. We are getting into the area when militaries look to graduate to repeating rifles. By the mid-1880s, the tube magazine was the most common route to obtain a repeater, whether it was the U.S. lever-action rifles, the Kropatschek, Swiss Vetterli, or Mauser 7184. Mannlicher's first attempt at a rifle was the M80, which was a turnbolt style with 3 rotating 5-round tubes located in the buttstock, meaning the rifle had a 15-round capacity. While it was reliable enough, the stock was bulky and the system deemed too complicated. His next rifle used the same turnbolt, but a more standard tube magazine, while his third rifle added a gravity-fed magazine. Both of these were rejected. His Model 84 rifle was the first with a straight pull bolt. Basically, as you pulled the bolt to the rear, ribs in the center moved the helical grooves of the shaft, rotating at 90 degrees. This motion would also bring the firing pin to full cock and eject the spent case, while pushing the bolt forward to pick up the next round from the magazine and chamber it. Mannlicher figured getting rid of wasted motion of turnbolts would increase the firing rate. This rifle was turned down due to the gravity-feed magazine, as well as questions about how well the bolt would hold up under heavy use. Mannlicher went back to the drawing board, keeping only the straight pull concept. It was his Model 85 rifle where we first see the beginnings of what we now call the Mannlicher-style magazine, where the magazine housing extends down from the stock, and you insert an in-block clip full of cartridges through the open top of the action. The Model 85 had an ejection lever to expel the clip once empty. A thumb lever at the rear of the magazine housing would release the partially loaded clip. The new straight pull system was cock-on-close this time. The military ordered 5,500 of these rifles for military trials. Mannlicher and Steyr would take the Army's advice and dump the ejection lever for the clip. Instead, there would be an opening at the bottom of the magazine and the empty clip would fall through. The Model 86 rifle was accepted, and Steyr received an order for 143,000 rifles. This fired the 11mm compressed black powder round. We have arrived at the year 1886, and if you know anything about firearms history, you know what else was released that year that changed everything: the French Model 1886 Lebel, the first rifle that fired a smokeless powder round. The Austro-Hungarian army would halt delivery of the Model 86 rifles in 1887 while they considered their options. They would make an 8mm compressed black powder round and convert existing rifles to this caliber. This rifle would be the Model 88. In 1890, a semi-smokeless round which propelled an 8mm 244 grain round at 1950 feet per second was made. The rifle conversion to handle this was the M.8895. Extended use found that the higher pressure cartridges would cause the bolt to compress, lessening support for the higher pressure cartridges, greatly decreasing accuracy. There was also poor initial extraction, and these problems combined would make the bolt manipulation difficult. This also meant there wasn't much room for improvements in ammunition that was bound to happen over the next couple decades. Still, there were over 1 million Model 86s, Model 88s, and Model 8890s produced, which meant that many saw frontline service during the Great War. Mannlicher would adapt his Model 84 bolt design to the smaller caliber, and this was added to the Model 90 carbine. The Austrians would finally perfect smokeless powder in 1892, and this would come with the Model 1893 cartridge. The case was shortened 2 mm for the M1890 semi-smokeless round, so this new round with a smokeless charge could be fired from the older rifles. Mannlicher would combine everything along with metal metallurgy into a full infantry-length rifle, and finally today's rifle, the Repeatergewehr Model 1895. The Model 95 is 50.1 inches long and weighs 8.3 pounds. When released, it fired the 8x50mm rim Patron Model 1893 cartridge that sent a 244 grain projectile downrange at around 2,035 feet per second. As discussed, it was loaded via a 5-round en-bloc clip into a fixed box magazine through an open top, and the clip falls from the bottom opening in the bottom of the magazine once all the cartridges are expended. The rounds I am firing are not M93, but that is something I'll get to in a bit. The straight pull action was said to give a 10 round per minute rate advantage over the Lee-Enfield or Mauser, but how that ended up in wartime practice I cannot find reliable sources on. The sight is a leaf sight that goes from 300 to 2600 Schritt, which is German for paces. This comes out to roughly 246 yards to 2,130 yards. These rifles were produced at both Steyr and FEG Budapest and was exported to a few other nations, most notable Bulgaria. This would be the Empire's official rifle during the Great War, even though it wasn't even the most produced rifle by Steyr. Steyr had become the largest producer of firearms in the world, and when other nations started to adopt German stripper clip-fed Mauser rifles over Mannlicher rifles, Steyr would obtain a license to produce Mausers and would actually produce more Mausers than Mannlichers. I have looked for sources to find out how the rifles was viewed during the Great War, as I wonder if the rifle's reputation suffered due to the Empire's poor performance during the Great War. Think of the Carcano's reputation suffering from Italy's performance during both World Wars. But I haven't found much other than the complaints of the obvious. Dirt entering from the open magazine, straight pull bolt getting sticky, and the clip system made it so you couldn't top off the magazine. The rifles would be converted and produced into the Second World War, something I'll get to in the next video except for one thing. Note the S on my receiver, and remember I earlier said I did not fire the 8x50 M93 ammo. In 1930, an 8x56mm round that fired a 206 grain Spitzer bullet at 2,300 feet per second was made for the Steyr Solothurn light machine gun. These rounds would fit in the same clip used by the M95 rifles and carbines, so starting in 1931, Austria, the Kingdom of Hungary, and in 1934 Bulgaria would rechamber the rifles on hand for the new cartridge, as well as all new rifles produced. Rifles chambered for this are marked by an S on the Steyr rifles, whereas the Hungarian rifles are marked with an H. Cleaning up a little history, Mannlicher would receive many rewards from the Empire in the last decade of the 19th century and go on to develop semi-auto rifles that, while never adopted, are said to be inspirations for the later U.S. M1 carbine. He was a private man who just worked hard and went home. He died in 1904 at the age of 55. My thoughts on shooting the rifle. While my main source seems to have fallen in love with the subject, both the man and the rifle, I will say that besides the Ross rifle, another straight-pull rifle that borrowed from Mannlicher, this is my least favorite World War I era rifle to fire. Perhaps 100 years of wear and tear on these rifles can cloud my judgment on how they would have been in the Great War, but in all fairness, this rifle is one of the best conditioned rifles in my Great War collection. This compares very unfavorably to the Swiss Model 1911 straight pull, which is very smooth. The key word when operating the M95 is force. You can't Yancey this bolt in or out, and the palm of my hand was hurting after shooting around 50 rounds from this rifle that day. The clip needs to be in decent shape as well, or else you'll have trouble cycling all the rounds. I also just prefer a stripper clip or even a charger-fed system, because if you have a malfunction, at least you can get rid of the offending round and go on. With the Mannlicher system, you have to fiddle with the clip and any rounds that are left in it. There's a reason that the Mauser system became the world standard over the Mannlicher. It seems balanced enough, and when working is a suitable rifle, I guess, but this does not rank very high versus its contemporaries. Please be aware of where your elected officials and the groups who claim to represent you stand on the Constitution. Please join the GOA and get $5 off your membership with my link in the description, and no, I do not receive a kickback. If you like my content, please check out my other videos, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Interaction really helps with YouTube's algorithms. Please check out my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parler, and who I support on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.